Hello everyone, this tutorial video will show you how to create science equations based on the math equation created for you by the Google spreadsheet template. So once you have pulled your graph out of the Google Sheet, it should look something like this if it's a two-variable graph. And below the graph, in particular, I want to draw your attention to the equation that is supplied to you for the line that the sheet draws on your graph. This is an equation format that you may be familiar with. It is a math equation, y equals mx plus b. It's called slope-intercept, but that's not very important for our purposes. What is important is that it is the beginning of what we are looking for, and we are not going to be reporting the math equation in science class. We're going to be reporting a science equation. So we're going to first go through each of the different parts of the math equation and see what they are supposed to be transformed into in our science equation. And then we're going to work through the example provided at the bottom of my graph. So the math equation starts out with four important parts: y, m, x, and b. And if we look at each of those parts in detail, y and x are the two variables. And in math, they are sometimes not described beyond the fact that they are variables. We just call them variables. M is the slope of the line that we are drawing, and B is the intercept of that line. Now this is when we see the equation in the math class. In science, we're slightly more specific, and we say that y is our dependent variable, and that x is our independent variable. M is still the slope. That doesn't change very much. And B is still the intercept of the line. We leave the equal sign and the plus sign where they are. And so we're just going to have the dependent variable is equal to the slope times the independent variable plus the intercept of that line. So if we go back to my graph and look at the equation that is provided, first of all, the y is hidden on this. It's left implied. So our very first step is going to be to identify the dependent variable so that we can put it into our science equation. And if we zoom back out a little bit, the dependent variable should be listed on our graph. In my case, it is washers to break the bridge. So when I'm working on creating my science equation, I am literally going to write washers to break bridge equals. And then I'm going to go back to my graph and grab my independent variable, which is going to stand in for x. In this case, it is strands of spaghetti in the bridge. So I'm literally going to write strands of spaghetti in the bridge. My plus sign is going to stay the same. Now, when talking about the two variables in the equation, I want you to notice that we do not have x and y in our science equation. We have the actual variables that are being measured. This is one of the ways that the science equation is separated from the math equation. The other way that the science equation is different from the math equation is when we go to write in the numerical values for the slope and the intercept, we must include units. So if we look at the intercept, which in my case is 0.0667, so I'm going to come right here and say 0.0667, I have to include a unit for that number. The intercept is the value of the dependent variable when the independent variable equals 0. So that means that it is going to be the same as the unit of our dependent variable. In this case, that would be washers. Okay. For my slope, which is generally calculated using rise over run, there are actually 2 units in the slope. And so I most often write it out as a fraction. And the numerator of the fraction is provided to us on the graph, 1.59. If we look at the rise over run calculation, the vertical axis is the rise, so the unit of the vertical axis would be in the numerator, washers, and the run is the horizontal axis, so that would be strands of spaghetti. The question that I come across most often when discussing science equations is what number would go in the denominator to match up with that strand. And just like we would say that I am driving 65 miles per hour on the 101, I would say I have 1.59 washers per strand. And that per means for every one. So your denominator of your slope in your science equation is always going to be 1. Your numerator will be the numerical value provided for you on the graph. The denominator is always going to be 1. So here's my example science equation. Washers to break the bridge is equal to 1.59 washers for every 1 strand times the number of strands of spaghetti in the bridge plus 0.0667 washers. There are a lot of words in your science equation. And as we move forward in the course, these variables will be replaced with variables like pressure, volume, mass. But we will continue to use the actual variable that is being measured. Okay, so today we looked at what a science equation is. We looked at an example graph and the equation that is provided for you at the bottom of that graph. We talked about how to change that into a science equation by replacing the different math letter variables with the actual variables that are being measured. We talked about using units for both the slope and the intercept, and we talked about the fact that the slope is going to need to have 2 units and that the denominator of the slope will always be 1. Thank you very much and have a nice day.